Welcome to the Oncology Voice Network Podcast, connecting the voices that move oncology drug development forward.
Welcome to the Oncology Voice Network Podcast. I'm Dr. Kirk Shepard. This show brings the real-world voices of oncology drug development to life. Leaders, innovators, patients, and partners who are shaping the future of cancer care. Today, we're diving into one of the most pressing challenges in oncology, building the workforce capable of advancing life-saving therapies. Entitled, Humans Behind the Algorithm, Building the Oncology Workforce of the Future. Or perhaps more simply put, how to hire the right talent and find a new role in the age of AI. As cancer care becomes increasingly complex, and innovative treatments accelerate forward, success depends on more than scientific breakthroughs. It depends on having the right people in the right roles to bring the breakthroughs to patients. Our guest today is someone who sits at the heart of that mission. Stacey Benefiel, PharmD, is the head of global, clinical, and medical affairs at Canopy. She is a trusted voice with more than 25 years of experience across pharmaceutical, biotech, medical device organizations. In today's conversation, we'll explore the reality of shaping tomorrow's oncology workforce. Stacey, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kirk. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, before we get started on our important subject today, would you please tell me a little bit about yourself, your career, your experiences, and why and how you came to specialize in this type of work?
Well, thank you, Kirk. I appreciate the opportunity. So I'm a pharmacist by background. I've been in industry over 25 years. The first half of my career, I was on the industry side. So mostly within medical affairs, as an MSL, leading medical affairs teams across a variety of different organizations. And then post-negative data, post-layoff, I found myself in the agency side. So I've been leading global recruiting within medical, clinical, regulatory roles for over 12 years. And for me, it's not honestly just a job. It's a very important, fulfilling work role that I have, right? Because I've been laid off twice. I know what it's like when you have to go search for a job, and when the economy isn't great and the jobs aren't out there, it's very, very stressful. And I understand that. I've also hired countless MSLs in my day. So as a hiring manager, I also understand how important it is to hire the right talent, right? And so for me, my whole goal is to make sure that my clients and hiring managers have the right individuals, and also really to help my candidates understand and find the right roles for them, for their families, right? We know our job is our job, but it's also a really important part of who we are. And so being there for candidates when they're going through potentially a rough time trying to find a new job is a very important part of what I do.
Well, Stacey, thank you very much for that story of your path to this point in your career, a very human story where you've actually felt the pain of looking for a job yourself, the discouragement of being let go. We've all been through that, and it helps that you have that experience so you can add the human perspective to helping your colleagues. Let's start with the basics first. When we talk about getting new therapies to the market, what makes the right talent so critical to success?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think hiring the right talent in any job is incredibly important. We know that, right? Kirk, you've hired a lot of people. You have to bring the right people into the organization, but especially so in oncology drug development. This world and industry is so complex, right? It's high risk, it's complex. You have regulatory issues, you have clinical challenges that you may not anticipate, certainly competitive pressures. And as we've all seen over the last several years, the financial uncertainty that is just a part of what we do. And so regardless of whatever role that you are looking to hire, you have to have the right people, because ultimately those people are going to be critical to getting those products that we're working to develop to the patients that are really waiting for us to do that.
So a lot's happened in the last few years. We had the COVID epidemic, elections in the U.S., downsizing of some major companies, just to mention a few. How has this affected the demand for specialized oncology talent in the recent years? And what are some of the biggest bottlenecks for clients you're seeing?
Yeah, so it has definitely been a roller coaster over the last couple of years, certainly. So I think it's really helpful to look backwards just a bit, and so it will help explain where we are right now. So first, oncology individuals have always been very much in demand, right? They're always the folks that there's never enough of them, and they always demand top dollar, right? When you're hiring these individuals. And so back around COVID 2020, 2021, we had a huge frenzy of hiring, right? We had PPP loans that came in, low interest rates. There was just a real explosion in the market. And so there were not literally enough experienced oncology MSLs to fill all of the open roles that we had. And so what happened, and if you did hire them, you were paying a top dollar, right, as well. So what happened is companies started hiring entry-level individuals, which hadn't really happened at a great extent until that time. And so we had this pool of candidates. The talent pool just exploded, right, during 2021. And unfortunately, in 2022, everything really screeched to a halt. We had inflation. We had the IRA Drug Act that made, top big pharma companies have to negotiate Medicare drug pricing. And so we started to see a lot of downsizings. 2022, biotech got hit really hard. 2023 was more the big pharma that started to. And certainly those downsizings have continued into 24, 25. We are starting to see an uptick in individual contributor roles, but the biggest bottleneck that I see right now is honestly still uncertainty, right? And so companies are very hesitant to add direct hire headcount. And so the work hasn't gone away, right? But just getting the headcount and the people to do it has been a real challenge for many companies. And so companies have certainly leaned into consultants, to contractors, to fractional work to get a lot of that work done. So it's been very much a roller coaster. It's very, very unpredictable in terms of what's going to happen. I couldn't give you a crystal ball into what next year is going to look like. I think until some of these uncertainties in the, industry with inflation, regulations, et cetera, stabilize, we're going to still see some of these issues that we've dealt with over the last few years.
Well, it's encouraging to hear that you think there is an uptick in activity because it has been down for the past couple of years. But let's talk about the promise of AI. There was a lot of optimism around AI and automation in hiring. Looking back, what were the original hopes and promises?
Yeah, so first, there's a real big distinction between AI and automation, right? And we can talk about all of that in just a little bit. But really, to answer that question, right, what was the promise? Well, the promise and the hope is that AI was going to make everything completely streamlined, right? Effortless, almost turnkey, right? But Kirk, you and I have both hired human beings before, right? And we know that human beings are not a predictable creature. And so at its core, recruiting, hiring, et cetera, is a human process, right? You're evaluating judgment, communication, cultural fit, right? We all know how important cultural fit is. And those are things that can be supported by technology, but it absolutely cannot be replaced by it. And truly, it never will be. And so I think what we've learned with all of this process that we've seen over the last few years is that human beings absolutely have to and will remain at the core of hiring, as even though we may lean into AI and automation.
You've said that instead of elevating great candidates, AI tools are sometimes creating a black hole. Now, I'm familiar with the definition of black holes in astronomy, where there's regions in space that the gravitational pull is so intense that nothing escapes from them, not even light. That doesn't sound too good for job candidates. What do you mean by black hole in talent search?
Yes. So the black hole, the perpetual black hole, it's like the blue screen of death on your computer, right? Everyone knows what that is, right? But the black hole, unfortunately, it happens a lot. It's always happened to a certain extent, just getting lost in the bureaucracy of things. But it's even more pronounced in the world of AI, right? So you apply to a job, right? You go on to LinkedIn or to a website and you apply, put your resume in, and you get, thank you for your application, and then nothing else, complete silence. And I can't tell you, Kirk, how many times I've had candidates come to me and say, I am made for this job. Like, I check every single box, but nothing, absolutely nothing. And it's incredibly frustrating. So what I think has really happened is that unintentionally, AI has made this vicious cycle within recruiting, right? It's just been something that has evolved over the last couple of years. So when we had all those layoffs, right, in 22, 23, certainly into 24, 25, the talent and HR teams were also hit too, right? So those teams were downsized. And as hiring has started to come back, those teams have been, rebuilt, rehired, but they're small. They're on a skeleton crew. And a lot of times those people are new. So they don't understand the nuances of the jobs that they're looking at or the candidates. And so you also had this huge pool of candidates that were trying to find a job because they've all been laid off. And the talent pool had grown tremendously. And so the volume was really overwhelming for a lot of companies. And so what they ended up doing was that they turned to AI to help manage that influx of candidates. And so the early versions of AI did keyword matching, right? So if you didn't have the keyword in your resume, you weren't going to get through. And so candidates started to figure that out. They would even just copy and paste the job description, put it in their CV in white font, whatever trick they could to get through the filter, right? And so as a result, again, the talent acquisition folks were just flooded with candidates. So AI adapted. And now what we're seeing is that these AI filters are using context within their screening tools. And so, of course, your candidates are going to adapt to that as well. And so now not only are they using keywords in their resumes and their CVs, but they're also putting in the job description. They're having ChatGPT or whatever match their resumes and their CVs to the job description, sometimes even to the hiring manager's LinkedIn bio, to be able to get through this context. And so the end result is these companies and talent acquisition and HR teams and hiring managers are receiving resumes that are not really reflective and many times of what a candidate brings to the table, but just that it can beat the algorithm. And so it's a very interesting place where, unfortunately, it leaves a lot of frustration for candidates and for hiring managers because oftentimes neither side understands or knows really what's real. And it's driven, again, by this AI automation that we've seen.
So you're saying over-reliance on the application tracking system, sometimes called ATS, or the AI-driven screening actually is affecting the quality of the hires in pharma or biotech. Is that right?
Yes and no. So first, ATS systems are a little bit different, certainly, than the AI kind of driven screening tools. Those ATS systems like the greenhouses, the Workdays of the world, those tools are great. Honestly, I think it makes the whole process much more efficient if they're used right? It keeps communication open. It keeps the process flowing. So those systems are the automation piece that we kind of alluded to earlier. And leaning on those, I think, is a very good thing for everyone. But over-reliance on AI to, filter your candidates, to analyze, assess your candidates. Sometimes we even have avatars that are doing initial screenings and interviews of candidates in an interview setting, which I think is really problematic, especially within oncology drug development, where, as you know, Kirk, those specific details really do matter in assessing your candidates.
It sounds like the makings of a good future sci-fi movie to me. The battle of the company talent search AI and avatars versus the candidates AI and avatars. Perhaps you can give us some data or examples of what you're talking about.
Well, for example, there was a New York Times article that was discussing using avatars, and there were the overwhelming response to that and feeling from candidates was it was very impersonal. Some people even said, that they feel like the system was just using them to train itself, right? And they felt kind of used in a way, right? And versus really having a back and forth conversation to see if the job fit is right for what they're looking for too, right? It's a two-way street. And in order to get the right talent, you have to have that two-way communication. With these avatars and systems, at least the way they are now, that doesn't happen. But I will say, Kirk, that one of the individuals that they interviewed was, early college grad and someone who had grown up in the world of technology and being online and gaming. And that person actually said he felt more comfortable in that setting. He wasn't nervous because he didn't have to talk to a human. So we'll see how that all evolves. There's certainly a generational difference between, perspectives on that topic, but it's a new world.
Wow. So maybe you could check a box whether you want to talk to a human or an avatar.
Maybe.
Maybe. Well, can you unpack how bias can creep into these systems? For instance, when model inputs are outdated or unchecked?
Yeah, and bias is a huge issue, right? You can't understate the issue that you have with bias when you're looking at these AI-driven systems. And in recruiting, there's several ways that it happens, but the three primary ways, one starts with historical data. So when a company starts to use the AI software that they buy, et cetera, they have to train it, right? So that's a costly process in and of itself. It takes time. And what they do is they go back and they look at previous job postings, job descriptions, candidates that have applied, who's moved forward, who hasn't, who you've hired. And so any just inherent biases that a company may have, like demographics, who you hired, like if you tended to hire people from Harvard or whatever, those inherent biases that you've had in the past will only be amplified because the system knows that as a good hire, right? So that's one. The second one is those keywords, right? We've talked about those. And the keywords are very much a slippery slope, right? If you have words in there like woman or first generation, those words can either fairly or unfairly rule someone in or rule someone out based on that bias. So that is very much a slippery slope for companies to be aware of. The other one is like facial or voice-based screening. So when we're talking about the avatars and having those virtual interactions, so then we're talking about things like skin tone, accents, response times, right? So if you have a candidate that may have some type of disability, they could be negatively impacted or graded based on the response times to questions. And so obviously, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to realize that there's some real issues with that. And we all know our legislation is really scrambling to keep up with what we have in AI now, all these new issues. But I will tell you, in the EU specifically, they have very much addressed the use of AI in hiring. And the overall take-home message from that legislation is that humans must absolutely be kept at the center of all hiring decisions when it comes to incorporating AI into any type of recruiting or hiring. That certainly is very clearly communicated by AI or by the EU regulators. And in the States as well, the legislation is starting to happen. Currently, at least 18 states plus Puerto Rico do have legislation that involves how you use and can legally use AI within hiring. California was the most recent one. October 1st, they had new legislation that came in that said you cannot have any type of bias incorporated into the use of AI when you hire. And obviously, that's a pretty broad term, but the teeth behind that are pretty significant. So a company can be held legally liable if a candidate feels like they have been passed over because of bias in the system. Not only the company, but the software provider that is doing the AI can also be held legally liable for those types of issues.
How would you say these issues are particularly pronounced in oncology hiring, where roles can be so specialized and nuanced?
Yeah, so it's very important. We've talked about that a couple times. The nuances really do matter when you are looking at these very specialized roles. And I equate it to an investigator looking at a patient, a potential subject to enroll into a clinical program. So the coordinator can say, "Hey, listen, this patient might be a really good fit for our trial. They match all the inclusion criteria. They don't have any of the exclusion criteria." But when the investigator sits down in the room and has the conversation and starts explaining the trial, well, maybe it's clear that the patient is really concerned about just being in a clinical trial. They're really uncomfortable with it. Or maybe the investigator feels like this patient may not be very compliant, right, with the therapies and all the things that they need to do if they're going to take part in this. And so again, they may look right on paper, but they may not. And I'll give you an example just in recruiting. Just the other day, I had a candidate that I was looking at for a position that we're working on, and he checked all the boxes, had all the right therapeutic experience, you name it. Well, turns out when I talked to him, his relationships were not in the territory. They were just outside of the territory. But for this particular client, that's really important, right? So even though he looked right on paper, he just unfortunately wasn't the right fit.
So let's look at the path forward. You've said that AI and technology aren't going away, and they shouldn't. So what does responsible use look like?
Absolutely, without a doubt, Kirk, that responsible use means having humans involved in every step of the process, right? It's human-enabled technology. So helping design the system, helping design the criteria that you're using to assess things, but also very much being involved in the decision-making and the ultimate filtering analysis of the candidates that come in or whatever situation it might be. But humans have to always be involved in it.
Well, I like what you're saying. I mean, that AI is really augmentation of intelligence more than artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And that AI should act as a powerful tool to assist us in boosting human abilities. Are there practical steps that companies can take today to make sure their tools are serving their mission and not undermining it?
Yeah, so responsible use certainly means acknowledging that the reality is that AI is here and it is not going anywhere. Over 60% of candidates are using AI in their job search, probably more than that. Over 80% of hiring managers are using AI to assess candidates. So really the main core factor that we have to continue to abide by is keeping humans very much involved in the process at every step.
So let's go towards the ending with a positive note. What gives you hope about the future of hiring in life sciences and oncology?
So I am actually very, very hopeful and positive about what oncology hiring looks like going into the future for two reasons. First, I think we are absolutely entering one of the most innovative eras in oncology that we've ever seen. And ironically, due in part to AI, right? AI has helped us identify molecules that have the potential to be efficacious versus ones that may not have that potential. And so one, I think that's a really important factor that's going to drive hiring down the road. Second, historically, if the pendulum swings like we've seen it swing in the past, right, Kirk, you and I have been around long enough to see these pendulum swings. I think we are very much poised to see a resurgence within biotech hiring. And the primary reason for that is because of all of those acquisitions that we've seen happen over the last couple of years. Every day you turn on the radio, the news, et cetera, you see Novartis, Pfizer, Novo buying companies left and right. And so effectively what's happened is they buy them for, a certain few molecules or programs within an organization. But there are certainly hundreds, if not thousands of other molecules that have been part of these acquisitions that are not being developed. And so once the global economy stabilizes, interest rates come down, biotech investors or venture capitalist investors are really poised to be able to come back into the industry, put money behind the outsource or the spin outs of those organizations into new biotechs. That's what we saw happen in 2012, 2015. And so when that happens, I really do expect that we're going to see a resurgence in hiring within biotech.
So if you could leave our listeners with one key message about the role of humans in AI-driven hiring, what would that be?
Plain and simple, right? In oncology, every hiring decision ultimately touches the patient. And that is absolutely why keeping humanity at the center is completely essential to every step of the process. Technology can certainly help us work smarter, faster, more efficient, but it's human judgment that absolutely ensures we bring in the people who are truly going to make a difference for our patients.
Stacey, I love your final statement. I just want to repeat it because to me, I think it's so important. In oncology, every hiring decision ultimately touches patients. And that's why we need to keep humanity at the center, and it's essential. So thank you, Stacey, for joining me today on this important discussion.
Well, thank you, Kirk. It's been a pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity.
That's it for this episode. I'm Dr. Kirk Shepard. Thanks for listening and for being a part of the conversation that's moving oncology forward.